Hello and welcome to Chapter 4, Part 1. This is Professor Farhat. In this session we're going to start looking at what we call this process costing. Now in the previous chapter, in Chapter 3, we look at a different costing method, which is job order costing. So I want you to understand that we have two types of costing. Some jobs require job order costing, and in some jobs we're going to call them process costing. What is the difference between the two? Job order costing and process costing. And if you're not familiar with job order costing, go back to Chapter 3 and you'll be able to review what job order costing is. What I would like to do, I would like to show you a picture of a job order costing and process costing before we start. I collected those pictures from Google Images. And this is what job order costing looks like. You are building one unique product. For example, this is a customized boat. Usually you have already an order for it. Notice here are the labor, the individuals that are working on this boat, and the material is mainly the wood as well as other material. But this is what we are looking at in a job order costing. We're building one unique boat for one specific customer. We could be building more than one boat for the same customer, but the job is unique. We're not really producing hundreds and hundreds of them. Okay, so this is what a job order costing is. Now, process costing, when you think of process costing, think of this picture. Think of this picture. Here, what are we doing? We are having bottled water. We are filling out bottled water. Or look at this picture. Notice how many bottles we are producing. We are producing in masses. They all look the same size, the same weight, the same material, the same manufacturing process, and we're building hundreds and hundreds of them, maybe thousands, if not hundreds of thousands. Okay, so this is what I want you to do. This is the picture of process costing, and this is the picture of a job order costing. Okay, hopefully the picture sometime will help you remember things. So let's talk about process costing and compare first to job order costing. Okay, well, obviously both systems assign material, labor, and overhead, obviously, to product, and they provide a mechanism for computing the cost per unit product. So obviously both, if you're using process costing or job order costing system, you're going to incur material, labor, and overhead. Both systems use the same manufacturing account, so we're going to be using with the same manufacturing account, such as manufacturing overhead, raw material, work in process, and finished goods. If you don't know what these terms are, go back to the previous chapter. The flow of cost through the manufacturing account is basically the same in both systems. So the way the cost flow is the same, and this is the picture. Well, we're going to see a picture shortly about how does the flow of cost go through the system. Now, differences between job order costing and process order costing. Here are the differences. Process costing is used when a single product is produced on a continuous basis or for a long period of time. Once again, let me show you the picture. This way you would remember. This is the picture of process costing. We are continuously producing one single product, but we are producing it in masses. Job order costing is used when many different jobs having different production requirements are worked on each period. Also, job order costing, and I want to show you the picture, is used with many different jobs having different production requirements. So each boat is unique. Each boat is different. So that's why we use job order costing to keep track of our cost. Okay, because each job is unique, has a different requirement. This is the different production requirement, and this is why it's called a job order. So basically your job is customized to your need. System accumulate cost by department. So a job order system accumulate cost by job, by individual job. So when we have a job order costing, you remember we allocated everything to a job. The process costing, we're going to allocate everything to a department. So notice, by department, we're going to allocate the cost by department. This is for the process costing. For the job order costing, we allocated the cost for each individual job. And remember in the prior chapter, we worked that wooden crate. That was our job. Okay. The system compute unit cost by department. So the process costing compute unit cost by department. So we're going to figure out the unit cost, how much it's costing us in each department. A job order costing system compute unit cost by job on the cost job sheet. So what we do is we look at the unit cost by job, the whole job, how much it costs us on the job cost sheet. The process costing, we're going to be dealing with departments. How much did we spend in department A before the product moved on to department B? What is our unit cost by that department? So we're using departments. Okay, let's take a look at this question. Process costing is used for products that are what? Different and produced continuously, similar and produced continuously, individual unit produced to customer specification, purchase from vendors. So what do you guys think the answer? What could you eliminate immediately? Well, it's definitely not individual unit produced to customer specification, and purchase from vendors doesn't make much sense here. So we are with A and B. Is it different and produced continuously or similar and produced continuously? And hopefully you would know it is similar and produced continuously. Again, think of those water bottles or sodas. For example, PepsiCo or Coca-Cola, when they are filling those soda bottles, they may fill hundreds and thousands of them per week. Okay, they're all the same. Processing department. So we need to talk about processing department. So what we looked at is the differences and similarities. Now let's look at processing department. Processing department is any organizational unit or unit in an organization where material, labor, and overhead are added to the product. So we might have material, labor, and overhead added in department A. Okay, so this is one whole unit. The activities performed in processing department are performed uniformly on all units of production. So the way we apply material, labor, and overhead is performed uniformly. All the units basically consume the same amount of material, labor, and overhead. Okay. Furthermore, the output of the processing unit must be homogeneous. They all look the same. The end product look the same. Product and process costing environment typically flow in a sequence from one department to the other. So we might have 2 or 3 departments, and once the work is done in department A, the product moves to department B. And sometimes we could have department B, and once the product is done in department B, we could move it to department C. Let me give you kind of, let's see if I can kind of make up something with this example. Let's assume this bottling this company for bottling water, drinking water. Here's what's going to happen. Maybe in one department, all what they do is they prepare the plastic bottle and they put the sticker on it. So department A, you only have the bottle prepared, manufactured, and you put the sticker on it. Then the work is done. Then you move the bottle into department B. In department B, you fill the bottle with water, and that's all what you do. Just machines fill the water with bottle with water. Now, then go from department B to department C. In department C, you put the cap on. That's it. Then it's finished goods and it's ready to be sold. So you could have 3 different departments. So one department mass produce the bottles, get them ready to be filled, and then put the sticker on them. Then department B will fill them with water, and department C will put the cap, and we cap it, and we're good to go. We're ready to sell them. And maybe in department D, if you want to even go further, maybe in department, let me see if I want to think about department, maybe we package them. We put each 6 in a package or 12 in a package, and we package them. This also be a department, okay? If you want to consider this. But I want you to think of different departments. So each department does one thing and one thing only. So this is all what I wanted to talk about process costing. I want you to think about process costing just as the idea of process costing. The next thing we look at is actually we need to be computing. We're going to start by recording the flow of material, labor, and overhead through the process costing. Actually, I can go through this as well. Those are 2 related. So learning objective 1, remember, in what we're going to do, we take material, labor, and overhead, and goes into work in process, and this should be all review from chapter 2. Then work in process turns into finished goods. Then once the finished goods is sold, hopefully it's sold, and what's going to happen, it becomes cost of goods sold, and during that process we earn the revenue when it's sold. Okay. Now remember, in a job order costing, as I was telling you earlier, labor, material, and overhead is accumulated through a job. So we have specific jobs. Then once the job is finished, it's sold, and the job is turned into cost of goods sold. So for the job order costing, we are using jobs, each jobs individually. In a process costing system, what we're going to do, we're going to accumulate and trace labor, material, and overhead by what? By department, rather than by a job, rather than by a job. So what happened is direct material, direct labor, and manufacturing overhead goes into a processing department. Once the department is finished with this product, it's considered finished product for this department. It might move it to department 2. Once it's in department 2, we may add material, labor, and overhead. Then it moves maybe to finished goods or to a third department. Then eventually it will end up in finished goods. Then, and hopefully, what do? We sell the product. Okay, let's look at this. This example. For purposes of this example, assume there are two processing departments, Department A and Department B. We will use T accounts and journal entries. So this is basically should be a review for the journal entries. For example, when we issue raw material, we may issue raw material some to the Department A and some to Department B. So we have work in process Department A and work in process Department B. So each department will have its own work in process. Basically, we have a sub-ledger for work in process for Department A, sub-ledger for work in process Department B, but A plus B will give you the work in process for the general ledger. So we're going to have to keep track of each department separately. And what's the entry to do this? We credit the raw material, we debit work in process in Department 1, we debit work in process in Department 2. So we issued material to two departments. Then we're going to incur labor, and we're going to incur labor in Department A, and we're going to incur labor in Department B. So what happened is some of the labor cost, it's going to be allocated to Department A, and some of it's going to be allocated to Department B, depending on where the employees are spending the time or working on the product. Once again, the journal entry is debit work in process Department A, debit work in process Department B. Now we added the labor and credit salaries and wages payable. Then we have manufacturing overhead. Once again, labor, direct material, and manufacturing overhead. Again, when we apply the overhead, we're going to apply some to Department A and some to Department B. And the journal entry will be debit work in process Department A, debit work in process Department B, and credit manufacturing overhead. Now, once we have labor, material, and overhead, what happened to work in process? Work in process, once the Department A is finished, the product is transferred to Department B. So we're going to credit Department A, work in process, and debit Department B, work in process. Now, basically, whatever we done in Department A will need to be moved to Department B to keep working on it. So we're going to credit. We're going to debit work in process Department B to move the finished product from Department A to Department B, and credit Department A work in process, because that's it. All of that left us. Then once we're assuming we only have two departments. Once Department B has finished, guess what happened? Cost of goods manufactured is calculated for Department B, and the finished goods is transferred to finished goods, and now this is a completed unit. Now we are ready to sell it. So we credit work in process Department B, and we debit finished goods. And hopefully, what do we do from this point forward? Hopefully, we are going to sell it. That's why we did all of this. And once we sell it, we credit finished goods and we debit cost of goods sold. What else do? We debit account receivable, and we credit sales. And now it's sold, it's being delivered. So debit cost of goods sold, credit finished goods. Okay, so this is the flow of material, labor, and overhead through different departments, then from one department into the second department, and from the second department into finished goods. Now, the other important concept that you need to understand in this chapter, this is a new concept. Everything that you saw earlier, to a great degree, you should know how the cost flow of goods flow, how the costs flow through different departments. But this this equivalent units of production is a new concept, so make sure you understand it before you proceed, because if you don't understand what its equivalent unit of production is, then you're going to find difficulty surviving in this chapter. So make sure you know this. Okay. So equivalent units are the product of the number of partially completed units and the percentage of completion of those units. For example, well, let's look at the definition first. So equivalent units are the product of the number of partially completed. Partially completed sounds like what? Sounds like work in process, and the percentage completion of those units. So within work in process, what's going to happen now? We're going to assign a percentage of completion. For example, work in process is completed 40%. Now we're going to have to say 40% as to what? 40% as to labor, 40% as to material, 40% as to overhead. So what's going to happen is the degree of completion, it's going to be for three different things: labor, material, and overhead. Now we're going to go ahead and combine labor and overhead together, but I want you to think of that sometime the material could be 100% completed in work in process, but labor and conversion cost is 60% completed. So it will still be partially completed unit. So a complete unit is once it's 100% completed toward material, labor, and overhead. This is a completed unit. If those are not 100% completed, the unit is partially completed, and there's a degree of percentage for each of these costing factors: material, labor, and overhead. These partially completed units complicate the determination of department output for a given period and the unit cost that should be assigned to that output. So this is going to complicate matter a little bit. It's not a problem. We'll take care of it. Okay. Let's look at this. Well, let's assume we have two half cups. Well, if we combine those two, those two are equivalent to one full cup. Okay, so if I ask you how many cups do we have one full cup, which is the same as two half cups. Notice 50 plus 50 equal to one full cup. Okay, so let's see if we can basically do this quick calculation of the equivalent unit. So let's assume we have 10,000 unit, 70% completed. So we have 10,000 unit, 70% completed, and even though I'm not specifying here, I'm assuming it's 70% as to material, labor, and overhead, because sometimes the material could be 80%, the labor could be 60%, and overhead could be 30%. Okay, but here we are assuming it's 70% completed as to all material, labor, and overhead. Well, what's the equivalent unit of 10,000 units, 70% completed? The equivalent unit is 7,000 completed unit. So we have 10,000 units in process, but they are 70% completed. They are not finished. So 10,000 units partially completed up to 70% are equivalent to 7,000 complete unit. So we need to know how to calculate the equivalent units, the equivalent unit. Okay. Let's look at this exercise. Quick check. For the current period, Jones started 15,000 units. So we started 15,000. And completed 10,000 units. When we say completed 10,000 units, it means it's completed 100% as to material, labor, and overhead. Okay? So of the 15,000, let me do this on the Excel sheet. We have started 15,000, okay? Finished 10,000. And when we say finish 10,000, what we are assuming this is 100% as to material, labor, and overhead. That's what we are assuming once we say it's 100% completed. Now we still have how many units left? We still have 5,000 unit work in process, which is it's not completed. Well, let's see what are we told about those 5,000 units. Those 5,000 units are in process 30% completed. And here we are assuming it's 30% for material, labor, and overhead. That's fine. So now this 5,000 unit is 30% completed as to, I'm going to put it down, material, labor, and overhead. The reason I am emphasizing this point, because you're going to see in the next session that sometimes it's how much it's completed to material is different than labor and overhead. So now, well, this is 30% completed, so the equivalent unit is 1,500. So how many units? So the question is how many equivalent unit of production did Jones have for the period? And hopefully you know it's 11,500. 10,000 fully completed plus 5,000 units times 30%. So this is how many units. So when we calculate the cost per unit, we assume that we have how many units? We assume that we have 11,500, because this is how many equivalent units we have. So when we spread the cost over 11,500 units. So what I just showed you is extremely important, and it's going to get a little bit more complicated when we break the degree of completion into material, labor, and overhead. Okay, let's see, what else do we have? Calculating equivalent units. Equivalent units can be calculated in two ways. So to calculate the equivalent unit, we have two methods. We have the weighted average, which is number 2, and we have the FIFO method. In the chapter, we have the weighted average. The appendix cover the FIFO method. So we have two methods to calculate the equivalent unit. Okay. So the next thing we're going to start doing, guess what? Compute the equivalent unit of production. So the next thing we're going to look at is to compute the equivalent units of production using the weighted average method. But make sure you are comfortable with this concept. If you have, so you start at 15,000, finish 10,000 100%, but you still have 5,000 that are partially completed. So if I ask you what is the equivalent unit, you really completed 11,500 equivalent unit. Okay? And once you complete the 70% that's remaining in those 5,000 units, then they are 100% completed. Okay. Once again, if you have any questions, please email me or see me in class.